بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. نويت التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير ونفذ فار الاستفادة وحتى تمس بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودعاء إلى هدى ودلائل خير ابتغاء وسلام وطاعته وقربي وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. اللهم علمنا مما ينفعنا وينفعنا بما تعلمنا وانزلنا من فضلك علما وتعليما انك على كل شيء قدير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We welcome you all to our monthly Living Islam. And so this is going to be our last one for 2024. And inshallah, we hope that there might be some benefit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings for us gathering, and inshallah that our intentions are sincere. So just as a quick reminder, as we usually like to do, is that the Living Islam, this is not a lecture, it's not a talk. There is no topic that has been pre-selected. There is no agenda that I have planned. This is an open conversation such that people can feel comfortable talking about the different things that might come on their mind. So when we first developed the Living Islam, it was in response to some of the Mecca Center students saying that they wanted to have a space where they had the freedom to basically talk and ask and discuss the things that were pertinent to them that may not necessarily relate nicely to a class, or maybe a little bit longer in terms of discussion. And so we developed the Living Islam. And so again, this is an open conversation. I have nothing pre-planned. And so as I usually like to say is that, if no one wants to participate or no one wants to have a conversation, then we can sit in each other's comfortable or uncomfortable silence, however you kind of look at that, for the next 2 hours. But that's kind of my little spiel. And so I will open the floor to everyone else. And just as a reference, you can feel free to, if you're on the Zoom session, to type or to unmute your mic. And then also, if you happen to be on YouTube or Facebook, then you can also send in a comment or a question via Forms. And again, one of the things I always keep liking to emphasize is that this is not a Q&A. So it doesn't just have to be question answer, and also it doesn't just have to be me answering questions that come in. People can feel free to participate. Someone was saying guidance on how to co-parent with a non-Muslim parent. It's difficult, in particular because there's going to be two different worldviews and two different approaches possibly. So the best thing to try to do is to try to do one's best to inculcate a love of Allah and the Messenger of Allah ﷺ with their children when they are able to be around them. And then depending on what the situation is with the co-parent, is to try to explain to the child why, as a Muslim, we would agree or disagree with those things that are either said or done, but really just trying to have a very loving Islamic home for the child, such that they can see the beauty of Islam for themselves. And then also, as we mentioned, just trying to really do whatever one can to inculcate the love of Allah and His Messenger ﷺ in their hearts. So, you could, Sheikh Hamza Karmali, he actually has a series where he does short little videos in reference to the beautiful character of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So a parent can allow for their children to watch some of those videos so that they get a better understanding and hopefully a growing love of the Prophet ﷺ and what it means to have truly good character. And then also having whatever may be beneficial for that child in terms of increasing their love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then also making sure that the parent themselves is exuberating that. Because the thing is, you're not going to be able to control what the other parent may expose that child to, but you want for it to be a situation where their Islamic foundation is strong enough such that it's not going to be overpowered by other influences, and then also being willing to have open conversations and honest conversations when a child may have questions in regards to some differences in the like. And if a parent doesn't necessarily know the answer, being willing to go to those who may be able to assist if they're not aware of the answer to the question. I got married 4 months later. I came with 2 children from previous marriages, so it's a lot of changes for all of us, just trying to navigate as best as I can. Yeah, and so again, the primary basis is to just try to make your home a loving, caring Islamic home, and really try to give the children a firm foundation. Because the reality of it is that even outside of the aspect of a co-parenting situation, our children don't belong to us. Our children are an iman, they're a trust. And so the reality is that eventually at some point in time, they are going to have to go out into the world. And of course, if we live in the Western world, like America, is that they're going to be exposed to all types of things that are not necessarily going to be Islamically inclined. And so the primary basis is to give them that firm foundation, that strong connection to Allah and His Messenger, so that they'll be able to go out into the world, wherever they are, and have that firm foundation. And one of the greatest foundations is the aspect of us ourselves as parents being firm in our own Islam ourselves, so that our children can see the benefit of Islam reflected upon us. Because even more so with children, it's not really what you say, but more or less what you do. And so they have to be able to see the reality and the beauty of Islam upon you, as well as you giving them these firm foundational tools, such that they can, again, be kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, inoculated against the different things that may come about during their lives as they, go through the different stages of life. And at the end of the day, the most important thing that any of us can do is to make sincere dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps our children safe. Because really, at the end of the day, it's only Allah that is going to guide our children. And so as parents, we need to do our best to be making on a regular basis, and making sure that, as our teachers have said, to us in different capacities and things that we've heard from other teachers, is making sure to never make dua against your child. That, they often mention like a story that, some of the righteous, if their child did something wrong and, they were really upset, there's a story that says that actually one of the imams at the Kaaba in Mecca is that when he was younger, when his mother used to get upset with him, she would say something like this. She would say, "May Allah make you an imam at the Kaaba." So that was her, that was what she would say when her child would get upset with him. When she would get upset with her child, is that instead of, because the default is that, a parent or someone will say something negative towards a child, but she understood the power of a parent's dua. So she would say that when he would get her upset or something like that, she would actually just make a dua for him. May Allah make you the imam of the Kaaba. So, again, but the emphasis here is this aspect of trying to be in a situation where we're constantly making sincere dua for our children to have good in this life and good in the next life, and ourselves trying to be the best of examples. And at the end of the day, understanding that that ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. And so having patience if we see our children going through their different phases, so to speak. You ask many people who are quote unquote righteous or religious now, and ask them, if they were born Muslim, if they were religious like that all their lives. And I would think it's safe to say that a significant percentage of them, for lack of a better way of putting it, had their time in the dunya, so to speak. And so I say that to say is like, don't kind of necessarily automatically freak out, if your child is not necessarily following the path verbatim, but still trying to keep that firm foundation, so that essentially that child, they know where to come back to. They know how not to stray too far, and they know the roots that are grounded, that they should always be able to go back to. And so again, we make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps our children safe and upon the straight path, inshallah. Yes, that's the playlist, the Discover the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's beneficial because it fits into the normative way that we do things nowadays. Is that many of us, we can't sit still for anything for longer than 5 minutes. And so the Discover the Prophet series, they're very short videos, so it helps particularly younger people who probably could only sit even less than that. So but it also gives a kind of a deeper reflection on the different incidents in the life of the Prophet ﷺ that are mentioned. So someone asks, where is the center located? In virtual reality. I say that because we used to have a physical location. Actually, prior to COVID, the Mecca Center was only a physical location. Like nothing that we did at the Mecca Center for the most part was online outside of advertising. Like if you wanted to come to our classes, if you wanted to come to our Living Islam events, you had to come to the heart of Times Square of all places. Like at one point we were about what, maybe a 15-minute walk from Penn Station, New York. And then we moved and we were about, again, like another 15 or so minute walk from Madison Square Garden. So like, you're talking like right in the heart of the city. It was horrible, at least for me. For those who don't necessarily know, I'm not a New Yorker. I don't like New York at all, for the most part. New York is a place where I say that I only go when absolutely necessary. So, I remember one time being with Sheikh Yahya Rodis one time, and we were in New York, and we were just talking about how living in New York really has nothing to offer for us. It was just, all the things that people seem to love about New York, because coincidentally, it was also like probably like 12 in the morning or 1 in the morning that we were walking around New York. but but we were kind of just saying, like, all the stuff that people seem to really love about New York is stuff that we wouldn't be wanting to do or be permitted for us to do, like, so so yeah, we used to be in the heart of Times Square. Then COVID hit, and then once COVID hit, the Mecca Center kind of switched. So you can kind of say that COVID forcefully made Mecca Center an online platform. And so because of the duration that COVID lasted, and then also, people were sheltering in place for so long, the revenue, because the Mecca Center is primarily driven by donations. And so if you don't have a physical location, you don't have people coming to the Jummah and so on and so forth. So a long answer to your question, COVID hit, the decision was made to break the lease of the space that the Mecca Center did have, and that the Mecca Center would go fully online. And so the thought process now is not necessarily to get another physical location, even though it seems like it still kind of is there. But the thing is that to be perfectly honest, it will be a little bit more difficult now, because for example, myself, I'm in Pennsylvania right now. Is it Sister Mina? Is that who is with us? Because it just says Mecca Center, so I have no clue.
Yes, that is me. Assalamualaikum.
And so Sister Mina, if I remember correctly, she's in Canada,
Yes, in Toronto.
Toronto. So I've
Yes.
never met her in person. Does a whole lot behind the scenes, like you guys don't know, but she does a whole lot behind the scenes. But I don't think she's ever been to the Mecca Center in person. I know I've never met her in person.
I have not been. I've met Sister Narisha. That's as far as the personnel that I've met.
And so Sister Nora Aisha is still in New York somewhere. I forget exactly where she lives in New York. But, Imam Kamal, who's one of the other teachers, he lives in Connecticut. Sheikh Nisar, he's all over the place. So it actually will probably be kind of difficult to actually do a physical location again for the Makkah Center. But there are other considerations that are taking place. So inshallah, I can't necessarily give anything away, but stay tuned, so to speak. There are some considerations of different things that can be done. And so, but in the meantime, what we have done is like we have had situations where like we would have a Living Islam actually be done in person. So like we would take one of the Living Islam programs and go to a restaurant or something like that and do it there. But there's currently no actual physical location for the Mecca Center. I saw the post for this on Instagram last night and thought maybe I could attend in person, but glad it's virtual. I'm in New Jersey and I'm definitely not a lover of New York City. Yeah, actually, I used to live in New Jersey, so it's a little bit easier in New Jersey. It was a little easier to commute to New York from New Jersey. You could just take the train or take the bus. But again, I'm not a New Yorker, and at this point, I'm not even a New Jerseyan. I mean, I was born and raised in New Jersey, but I've only been in Pennsylvania for a couple months, and I already would prefer Pennsylvania over Jersey, just from the location standpoint. People are different. I have most of the week off for the Christian holiday, but I'm not Christian. What should I do with my free time to build up Deen? There are different things. You know, it's also going to depend, like, how much extra income that you may have. Because, like, for example, I could have said you could have gone to RIS, which is the Revival of the Islamic Spirit, which takes place in Canada. But however, that's happening this weekend. So, like, it started yesterday and it's going till tomorrow. But as Sister Mina put in the chat, there's oftentimes different events that different institutions are having. I know, and I just happen to know that, see, Brian, you're in New Jersey. I know that ISCJ is having a 40 hadith intensive that they're doing. So, I mean, there are different events that are taking place, and usually they will have them around these times. So that is one thing to do, because this way you can have that actual physical, what we say in Arabic, sahba, that physical camaraderie. But also, even if you're going to have online events, or, I would say that if a person, I mean, you may not necessarily be able to do it now, but, like, for example, something to consider even maybe next year is that a person could consider going on Umrah during this time. This is like one of the perfect times to go on Umrah, because it's not as hot in Saudi Arabia, and then people, like you said, they usually have the time off. So for example, I'm working at a university now, and so we are trying to see about planning to take the students on Umrah next winter break. And also the aspect of taking classes. I don't know if Imam Mufti Suleiman has anything planned for ICMC, but Mufti Suleiman, he may be planning something, or he may know of different events. But again, usually during this time of the year, there are a good amount. But also, you can actually take this time to actually just visit your own family. Just because we don't necessarily celebrate the same holidays, it doesn't mean that we can't go and visit our family members, around these times, because often our families also have times off. And so we may not necessarily go visit them on Christmas Day, but, maybe 2 days before Christmas or something like that, that we go and visit our own families, because this is also an aspect of Islamic etiquette and character, is that we keep up good relationships with our families. So that's also something that a person can do as well, is to take the time to visit their own families and keep up those good family ties, inshallah. Yeah, COVID was a a blessing and a curse. I would say that COVID was like almost purely a blessing for us introverts. Like, I don't mind sitting at home. Before my shahada, I used my left hand, and I had to make myself remember to use the right hand. I recently got a second-degree burn, and I'm able to use the right hand. Is that okay? The aspect of using the right hand, and the thing is that it depends on what we're doing in terms of, because actually from the standpoint of Islam, the Muslim is ambidextrous. I believe that's the term. Is that there are some things that we use our right hand for, some things that we use our left hand for. However, if it is a situation where a person is unable to use one of their hands, then that dislikeness of using the other hand is removed. So, for example, in the time of Umar Khattab, anhu, there was an individual who was eating with his left hand, and Umar had advised him to eat with his right. And the man has said, "O Amir Mu'mineen, O commander of the faithful, my right hand is busy." And so Umar, he left it alone. And there are a lot of different wisdoms that we can take from this, but for the sake of time, we'll kind of get straight to the point. Is that after the the meal was over, Omar had approached this individual alone and asked him, "What did you mean that your right hand was busy?" And the man had taken his coat or his cloak and shown Omar that he was actually missing a portion of his arm. And so that's why he was not able to use his right hand. And so it was, Omar was informed that this man, he had lost a portion of his arm while he was in battle. And so Omar, became very emotional, and he made sure that the man was given, if I remember the story correctly, that he gave the man a servant to help him and assist him. And he also gave him some of the wealth from the Bayt al-Mal to help and assist him as well. And so if it's a situation where a person is not capable of using whichever the preferred hand is, so for example, if a person is eating and they're not able to use the right hand because of an injury or the like, then the dislikeness of using the left hand gets removed. Or if it's a situation where you can still somewhat use the right hand and it's not going to be a difficulty upon you. So for example, sometimes they mention, like for example, if a person's drinking something and they are not able to grab the drink with their right hand, maybe their right hand is dirty or something like that, then they can use their left hand to hold the drink, but then they use the right hand, they can use it like this, so that they're still using the right hand somewhat. So a person can also do that as well. But again, if a person has a valid reason for why they're not able to use their right hand, then that dislikeness can be removed, and Allah knows best. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah shanda. I'm assuming the boos become because I'm not a New Jerseyan or a New Yorker. Yeah, I'm sorry. I kind of lost all of my New Jersey love back back when I had moved to Georgia back when I was in college. So I haven't really had that New Jersey love for quite some time. I'm starting to realize how old I am now. I work at a college now, and I'm like, these students is like, dang, I've been out of college almost as long as some of you guys been born. I mean, excuse me, almost as long as some of you guys have been alive. So it's been quite some time. MashaAllah. Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh. Oh, in terms of wudu, if it's a situation where a person has an injury, then it may be a situation where a person will make tayammun instead of doing the full wudu. And so just like as a basic fiqh aspect of it, what a person would do is that they would do the wudu as much as possible. And then in the areas where they cannot do wudu, for example, so if it's a burn wound and you're not able to get that area wet, then instead of doing the wudu to the washing of that limb at that point, that you would do tayammun instead when you get to that particular limb. And then the rest of the body you would wash in the normal fashion. And so that would be, so that's the case of someone that has a wound or a bandage, is that they would do tayammun, the dry ablution, in place of the full wudu. And probably the easiest way of doing it would be to follow either the Hanafi school or the Maliki school in regards to that. And Allah knows best. The Shafis are just kind of hard. But also just keep in mind that if you are going to do that, just to cross-reference with a Hanafi or Maliki faqih or student of knowledge that can just walk you through the details of how that is to be done to make sure that the purification and the prayer will be valid. But essentially, that's how it be done. The Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned the case of a situation where there was a man who had a wound on his head that was a very significant gash, and while he was sleeping at night, he had a nocturnal emission such that he needed to make ghusl. So he was traveling with two other companions, and he had asked them, do you find any dispensation for me such that I don't have to make a full ghusl? Because he was worried about that gash on his head and it possibly getting infected. And so his two companions had said to him, no, you have to make ghusl. Like, you have to use water, you have to make ghusl. And so he made the ghusl and poured water over his head, and it ended up actually getting infected, and that individual passed away. And so when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had heard about this, he had actually said something very, very stern in regards to the situation. He said, "Qataluhu, qataluhu, qataluhu," that he said, they have killed him, they have killed him, they have killed him, and may Allah kill them. And so, that was, and he had mentioned that if they would have just asked, they would have known that he could have just made tayammun instead of making ghusl. And so that was a situation where the Prophet ﷺ actually became very upset because of the harm that came to someone when two individuals had spoken without having certain knowledge of the situation, to the point that that person had died. So yes, so if a person is in that type of situation, they can make tayammum. And so that that instance was narrated in Abu Dawood, and then it mentions that a portion of it was not necessarily fully related about the Prophet ﷺ, but again, the basis of it was what the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned, that when they came to the Prophet ﷺ and reported the incident, he said, they have killed him, and may Allah kill them, because they did not ask when they did not know. The cure for ignorance is inquiry. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from speaking when we are not in knowledge of a situation. What is the best way to memorize the prayers that are never said aloud in Salat, like the opening and closing prayers? I still struggle to pray them from memory. The same as the Tashahhud and the Salat, the Salawat on the Prophet ﷺ. Really, For one, it's going to depend on what madhab a person may follow. Because usually what I recommend to people is that in regards to that, if a person is following the Shafi madhab, it becomes a little bit easier because in the Shafi madhab, you can use a piece of paper while you're in the prayer. So meaning like you can hold a piece of paper while you're in the prayer and read off of that piece of paper. And so oftentimes what I would recommend to people in that type of situation is that they have a piece of paper that they have when they pray so that they can read from it. And what will happen is that as time goes by, you'll be able to say it faster and faster and faster. And then also as time goes by, you'll have to look at the paper less and less and less. So eventually it gets to the point where you barely ever have to look at the paper. And all of a sudden you've memorized it without necessarily having to go through a process of rote memorization. However, that is not the case for all the schools of law. So for example, in the Hanafi school of law, it's not permissible to use a piece of paper to try to memorize from. So what I could suggest is that if a person, for example, is following the Hanafi school of law, or if they want to be more precautious in avoiding the difference of opinion, then they can just take some time out, 10 minutes, 5 times a day, and listen to a recording. There are a lot of YouTube recordings that have the tashahhud and the opening supplications, the thana, and so on and so forth, and just go over it. Take maybe 10 minutes, 5 times a day. You can use it. Meaning you can make this review at the same time as you pray the salat, and then that constant repetition, inshallah, eventually you'll still get more or less the same results. Is that you'll start to be able to say it faster and faster, and then also you'll be able to say it with needing to look at a piece of paper less and less until eventually it gets to the point where you don't need to use a paper anymore. So that would be a possible suggestion. If anyone else has any other suggestions of things that may have helped them, please feel free to share as well. Alhamdulillah.
What happened?
So where is everyone coming from? If I'm not mistaken, if I look at the names, I think everyone is between New York and Toronto and New Jersey. So like I know Sister Mina is in Toronto. Brian, I know you're in New Jersey unless you moved. Ah, okay. Chandel is in Maryland. Sister Juan, the last I checked, you were still in New York unless something has switched. And Sister Valerie, the last I checked, you were still in New York as well. So everyone's on the Northeast.
Assalamu alaikum, Ustadh.
Alaikum salam, Tariq, how you doing?
Alhamdulillah. I am back in New York, but not for too long though. I I sometimes have a problem in that why is it that when I start praying, my mind happens to wander a bit, no matter how hard I try. Is there some way, a good way that 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 would be a good practice to focus when you're praying?
Yeah, this is a question that is often asked, and it's something that most of us, if not all of us, experience. And the cure that the ulama usually give for it is that a person should engage in the medicine that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed in the Quran, and that is dhikr. And essentially, what they explain in regards to that is that for us on our normal everyday activities throughout the day, oftentimes we're not in a state where we're consciously thinking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that, we're going and we're going to work, we're going to this one's house, we're thinking about, visiting this family member, we're thinking about how we're going to get to this place, we're thinking about the trip that we have to plan. So like we have a whole bunch of things that are going on in our lives that are primarily dunyawi focused. And so what happens is that we have all these different concerns that we're dealing with from a dunyawi perspective. And then when we come to the prayer, all of a sudden we're kind of trying to block all those things out and now just focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the thing is that if we're not of those who are of the dhakirin, those who are constantly in a state of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then our ruh, that which directly connects to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oftentimes it's going to be weaker than our nafs, our lower desires, so to speak. And so what happens is that, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is because sometimes people say, well, I can be having all these things going about, but then, I can sit and watch a movie for an hour and be completely engrossed in it, or I can sit and talk on the phone for an hour and be completely engrossed, and so on and so forth. And the thing is that the reason why that is because that is fulfilling the nafs, and for many of us, our nafs is stronger than our ruh, is that we've done more in our lifetime to strengthen our nafs, to strengthen our desires, than we have to strengthen our ruh. And so in order to combat that, we have to start doing things that will strengthen our ruh and decrease the strength of our nafs. And so dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is of the greatest means of obtaining that. And so when we say dhikr of Allah, it's trying to be as close to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as possible in that regard, in which Aisha, his wife, radiallahu anha, used to say about him, كَانَ يَذْكُرُ اللَّهَ فِي كُلِّ أَحْيَانِهِ, is that he used to remember Allah in all of his states. And so trying to start a regular regimen of me remembering Allah in as much of my day as possible. And even going beyond the aspect of just kind of like the normative verbal dua that we're used to. So like, it's good to say Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, or to say Subhana Rabbiyal A'la, or to say Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, or Subhanallah al-Azim, or any of the other dhikrs that we have, but also to try to incorporate with that the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the regular day-to-day activities that we have. So for example, if I'm going to buy and sell, that, if I'm going to the store to buy groceries, start trying to remember Allah in buying those groceries. So for example, when I go to the store to buy groceries, trying to remember Allah and actually trying to see, well, maybe I can buy less than what I was planning to. That, I can reduce the amount of food that I was going to get as a means of being closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and by following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, by not filling my belly. Or that when I'm out and I'm buying groceries, that I try to remember the ahkam, I try to remember the Islamic rulings in regards to how we're supposed to buy groceries, and so on and so forth. Or if I'm going to go to work, that I make my intention that when I go to work, I'm trying to fulfill my obligation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that when I'm at work, I try to do my job with ihsan. I try to do my job with excellence, not seeking any type of reward from my supervisor or from praise from other people, but rather because I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be pleased with me in terms of the work that I do, and so on and so forth. So that essentially that I can make it a situation where my whole day I'm in a state where I'm consciously trying to remember Allah. And then by doing that, inshallah, over time, I will find that my prayers will, inshallah, become better and better. Now, the thing is that I'm not saying that this is going to be something that happens overnight, because I could pretty much almost guarantee you that it's not. This is something that takes years of commitment and practice. The way that I put it to people is that anyone that's ever been to the gym, you try to do some type of workout or exercise, thing like that, or if a person was into martial arts, that, if a person comes into the gym for a week and they work out, no matter how hard they work out, it's not going to be a situation where you're going to see results that next week. Like, I don't care if they go in and they are doing everything picture perfect, got the form down packed, got the weights perfectly adjusted for their particular body type and so on and so forth. They're not going to see results that quickly. What's going to happen? They need to do this for months on end. And then after a couple months of doing this, then you might start seeing a little bit of results. And then when you get more and more consistent, then you'll start to see even more results. And so it's one of those things to also have patience with oneself, but trying to be consistent. And so I would say for many people is that at the beginning, just try to have one thing that you do that's consistent. If you want to do something, you can pick up just about any of the books of Imam Ghazali and immerse yourself in it. If you want to start somewhere, for example, you can start with his Bidayah to Hidayah, the beginning of guidance. And he will make you feel really bad, but he'll give you a tartib, he'll give you a regiment of how you should try to fulfill your day. And the whole basis of it is to try to come to a point of being more and more sincere with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then if you wish, you can go on to some of his other works. So for example, there are many portions of his Ihya al-Ulumuddin that has been translated. And so you can look at some of the sections. So for example, you can look at the sections of disciplining the soul and breaking the two desires. That was translated by Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, if I remember correctly. And so that is a good work in terms of coming to the point of actually disciplining the ego and breaking the two desires, that of food and that of the desire for the opposite gender. So, these are all things to take in consideration. And then if a person truly has the himma and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them tawfiq, is that you can seek out a spiritual guide, a scholar or a sheikh of purification of the heart, of tazkiyah or tasawwuf, and have them guide you upon the spiritual path, such that inshallah you'll be able to work on the self, such that you have complete concentration in the prayer itself. But it's a process. And so I'm sorry for anyone that was kind of looking for like the one, the one elixir, like, if I just take this drink, that's going to be the cure to all of it. It's not that simple. It's it's one of those things where, as is mentioned by Frederick Douglass, without struggle, there's no progress. So there's going to be a little bit of struggle, but the reward is great. But yeah, generally speaking, the scholars of Tazkiyah, they will say that ultimately it comes down to where is our dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where is our remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout the day. And also having a regular practice of getting up for tahajjud, that's kind of like, that is kind of like a standard across the board of being a person of tahajjud, getting up in the middle of the night. That is kind of like a standard that the ulama mentioned in terms of having that greater connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such that you have that greater connection with the prayer.
Thank you. I do that Salatul Tahajjud as often as I can. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for you and give you nearness to Him. Yeah. Because the other thing that I didn't mention is that there's actually a specific shaitan, there's a specific devil that's actually assigned to people to do that, to distract them in the prayer. And so again, this is why the dhikr becomes so important, because the thing that repels the shayateen is the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And is Trenton/Princeton really Central Jersey? I know that's a New Jerseyan argument, that depending on how invested in it, has a very sensitive.
My argument is 50 miles north or south of Interstate 195 is Central New Jersey. That's foolproof.
So the thing is that I always consider like Trenton and so on and so forth to just be South Jersey. Like, I guess you could say anything south of ISCJ is South Jersey.
I think the people of Princeton would probably argue against that.
I'm sure they would. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, because I would always consider like basically like Middlesex County to be Central Jersey, and then anything below Middlesex is going to be South Jersey. But I know that I would be fought vigorously in regards to that. And I think technically now they've actually officially made it that like more, was it Middlesex as well as Mercer County, and it's probably like one or two other counties are now officially Central Jersey. So, mashallah. It's not my argument anymore anyway. I live in Lehigh Valley. I live in Lehigh County. So I'm in a whole nother state. Ajib. Everything nowadays you could just get online. But I still like to buy actual textbooks. I can't stand reading books online. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Anything else on people's minds? See, it's a little easier when we were in a physical location, because if people were at the Living Islam, they really wanted to be there, because you, you had to come down to Midtown Manhattan, and then also we had food, so people usually come hungry, so they would also get a meal at the same time. Yeah, that was a nice thing about the in-person Living Islam, is that it was even more of a fellowship in the aspect of actually physically being together and having a meal together. That was the last time we did that, 4 years ago. Yeah, last time we had an in-person, truly in-person Living Islam, not just at a restaurant, was 4 years ago. I was actually surprised when they first had said that they were going to shut down for COVID. And I don't think anyone else realized that it was going to be extended, to the point that 4 years later, we've pretty much fully online. Well, as some people have said, it becomes a benefit, because if it wasn't for the aspect of COVID, we couldn't have, people from Maryland, Toronto, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, all participating. So, it's a gift and a curse at the same time. And I don't have to worry about catching the bus or the train at the end of it. Because that used to be the other thing. Because the weekend scheduled buses in New York, they don't run all that often. I think after a certain point, it's only once an hour. So if you miss your bus, kind of nice little hour wait till the next one comes. Did everyone else get snow, or was it just Pennsylvania? I know New Jersey didn't get any, or at least Central Jersey didn't get any. Toronto got snow. I think Toronto always gets snow. I remember one time driving back from Toronto and getting hit in seemed like a pop-up blizzard, almost like. It was one of the times that I was driving, was truly scared because I couldn't see anything. So Maryland just got a dusting. And I'm assuming New York didn't get much of anything. Yeah, I think Pennsylvania is supposed to drop to the 20s tomorrow, but the wind chill is supposed to make it feel like it's in the teens. Something like that. But this is that winter time for you. if you have separated with your spouse and you meet with them platonically to discuss your marriage, will that mean that you have forgiven that person and no longer ask for an annulment? So the thing is that in Islam, there are different aspects in terms of marital law. So a separation in Islam does not necessarily have a legal basis. And so unless an actual word of divorce is pronounced, the two people are not considered to necessarily be separated in terms of legally. Meaning that if a husband and wife just decide that they're not going to live in the same quarters for some period of time, then that is something that they can just decide to do. Now, if there was an actual divorce that was pronounced, then that has other legal implications. So from the way that the questioner is putting it, it seems as though that there was no pronouncement of divorce that was actually said, and that this was just a mutual agreement that they would have some time to themselves. And so in that particular case, there is no legal implications that have come about. The two people are still considered to be married, and so they can still do the same things that married couples do. So for example, if the question is like, do they have to have a third party when they meet? Then no. They don't have to do that. Even in the case that there was a divorce that was pronounced, if it's still within the woman's idda period, her waiting period, then even still, they would not have to have any type of third party or the like be present. Because until that woman's idda period is finished, the husband would have the right to take her back. And so it just depends on kind of what all the details of the situation is. But from what the question is saying, it seems as though this is just more or less a separation that they've just mutually decided to do without there being a word of divorce that was pronounced. And so those two people are still considered to be married from an Islamic law standpoint. And so they would not need a third party to be with them. Allahu alam, and Allah knows best. So my hygienist asked what I was doing for the holidays. I said working. I don't celebrate Christmas. Why? 2 minutes later, she wished me a Merry Christmas. I just said thanks, same to you. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that we can assume the best that, people are, they're just so used to how things typically go. And so they will, assume that more or less other people are kind of following the same type of way of life, particularly like in America, because even though we know that Christmas is religiously associated, for many people, religion has nothing to do with Christmas. For example, I've seen churches where they put up signs like, keep Christ in Christmas, because the basic aspect is that, many people, for Christmas is not a religious thing. It's just a cultural, normal, accepted way of doing things. That, this is the time that we have off, and this is the time that we are expected to give gifts to people. And so for many people, they don't even necessarily associate it with religion. They just more or less associate it with cultural norms. And the reality of it is that you actually do have some Muslims who will celebrate Christmas in whatever capacity that is. It's unfortunate, but you have that. You have people who are Muslim who will celebrate Christmas in some shape, form, or fashion based upon whatever rationale that they want to use. And so, it's not far-fetched that, people will just assume that everyone is being involved in the holiday season or whatever the case may be. So usually, like, if a person says something like that to me, it's that I won't even necessarily mention the holiday itself, because I don't want to promote their holiday. So I'll just say, like, have a great weekend, or have a great break, or whatever the case may be, and just go from there. You know, for many people, they mean good, or they mean well by it. It's just that they're not as used to kind of the other, so to speak, someone that doesn't celebrate Christmas. Because, for example, even an atheist will oftentimes celebrate Christmas, just again from the standpoint of this is just a time to give gifts and so on and so forth. Like, they don't place any value into any of the religious, or the yeah, they don't give any basis to, like, the religious, or the I can't think of the word that I want to use, but still, they could be a stone cold atheist, but they'll still get the Christmas tree and a whole other bit, just because that's just what you do, so to speak. So yeah, it could be a little interesting at times, or, like, sometimes a person might even get frustrated by it, but oftentimes people, they actually, it's kind of harmless. And so, yeah, for me, I don't try to wish people a Merry Christmas or anything like that. I'll just say, like, have a great weekend, have a great break, or whatever the case may be. Or I might even just say, God bless you, or something like that. But I always have my intention, if I, for example, if I say God bless you to a non-Muslim, my intention is always that I say God bless you with Islam. It's just the last portion of it I just say to myself. But you can also use it as an opportunity to possibly give dawah if the person is willing to listen. And it could also be good is that when the Eids come around, is that just like people like to give gifts to people during Christmas and stuff like that, you can give gifts to people during Eid, and then when they ask you, "Oh, what's this for?" you can explain to them about Eid. MashaAllah, I always wanted to go to Malaysia. And yes, even though Malaysia has a large Muslim population, you still have a good amount of non-Muslims, and then also just culturally and so on and so forth. So I am not surprised. But I would love to go to Malaysia. I actually considered moving to Malaysia at one point. was gonna see if I could possibly go to the University of Malaysia, but obviously it didn't go anywhere. Yeah. Any situation that we could possibly turn into a source of da'wah is always beneficial. Because as one hadith of the Prophet ﷺ mentions, is that for one person to be guided by you to Islam is better than the dunya wa ma fi. That is better than the dunya and what is in it. Just trying to. Yeah, so probably one of the more famous narrations for Allahi, لأن يهدي الله بك رجلا واحدا خيرا من حمراء النعم. That the Prophet ﷺ said, and he said this to Ali ibn Abi Talib, that for one person to be guided by means of you is better than خيرا من حمراء النعم, than red camels. And so red camels were the most expensive and the best camels of the day. And so you can kind of say, like, whatever is the most expensive and best car that you can think of, is that it'll be better than that, just for one person to be guided by you. But then there's another hadith where it talks about guiding a person being better than the dunya ma fi. I was just trying to get that reference. The one with the red camels, that's related in Bukhari. And as I'm looking for this, there's another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions the 2 rakas at dawn are better than this world and what it contains. Rakat al-fajr khayrun min ad-dunya wa ma fiha. That the 2 rakas of fajr are better than the world and what it contains. Sorry, I was just trying to get that reference. I'll say, okay, in Tabarani, the hadith says, for Allah to guide a man by your hand is better for you than everything over which the sun rises and sets. طيب. I've been having a back and forth with my children's father about the importance of learning Islamic history. He's of the belief that Muslims invented pretty much everything, and I know there is some nuance to that. How do I inject balance into the conversation? He's of the belief that Muslims invented pretty much everything. So you're saying that he thinks that our children should know about the history of Islamic contributions to the modern world, which I wholeheartedly agree, but he also looks down on European civilization and its contributions, which I don't. So the thing is that you are right in the aspect of wanting to have a balance of just because it's not necessarily coming from an Islamic source is not to say that we discount or negate the significance of that contribution. So, I mean, in this particular case, you're not necessarily going to be able to dictate how a person views the world or how they want to express their views. But what you can do is that from the standpoint of your own children is just to give them that knowledge that, yes, even though these people are not necessarily Muslim, they have been blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be able to have contributions that they've made to the world, so that they've been able to have the contribution of kada wa kada, whatever that may be. But, at the same time, explaining that even with that, the greatest contribution that any human being has given to the world is Islam. And so, it's one of those things where, from the standpoint of keeping harmony in the home, you don't necessarily have to overly emphasize it, but, just acknowledging that, for example, like, I'm just giving examples, like, you can say that, the discovery of peanut butter was made by George Washington Carver. George Washington Carver is not known to be Muslim, but at the end of the day, all human beings are the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So ultimately, everything goes back to Allah. But this individual who invented this, he was not known to be Muslim. And so, the hope would be that, something like that could be kind of like a middle ground, so to speak. But, but also emphasizing that even from the standpoint of the Sunnah, is that we never think ourselves better than someone just because we don't know them to be Muslim. Because the reality of it is that just because even ourselves are Muslim today, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be Muslim tomorrow. And so just because we don't necessarily know someone to be Muslim, for one, we don't necessarily know the full reality of the way that a person dies. And so it's a situation where you don't want a person to become in a state of imbalance where, they just look at anything that is not coming from the Muslims as if it has no significance in history or the like. But again, from the standpoint of just, keeping peace in the house, there are ways of just trying to make it balance. It's that, yes, if you want to look at it from the standpoint that everyone in creation ultimately is Muslim. in the sense that everyone is born in the fitrah, and in the sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is all powerful over all things. So ultimately, everything submits to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even if we don't know that person that invented whatever to not necessarily be Muslim, that person was only able to do that because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed it to be. This is why we say that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is al-Khaliq. He is the actual creator. Human beings, the only thing that we can do is that we can manipulate the things that already exist. And so, these are just kind of like ideas to try to kind of help the situation. But again, at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to change a person's way of thinking, so to speak. You can try to put little tidbits out there, but usually if a person is staunch in terms of a particular position, it kind of gets hard to get them out of it, especially the older that you get. As the saying goes, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. So we just try to have good relations with those who have a haqq upon us, or those who have a haqq upon those that we also have a haqq upon. There's racism everywhere. And the thing is that oftentimes people who are the victims of oppression, so that essentially you have one extreme, you can kind of say like the knee-jerk human reaction is basically just to go to the opposite extreme. And so you don't really get a balance. So it's like, we've been overly oppressed here, so we have to counter that by being completely opposed, on the opposite end. And that creates an imbalance. And so it's a situation of trying to get to that point of having that balance. But again, it becomes difficult because particularly when the people have seen the effects of like systematic racism and so on and so forth, this is, and I'm just giving this as an example, this is part of the reason why the Nation of Islam was so successful in its initial movement, is because why? It was completely shifting the narrative, so that you got, on the one hand, this aspect of, Black people being essentially the worst of society. And now you have this opposite extreme where it says that actually, no, Black people are the best of the human society, and actually white people are the complete devils. And so like, this is an opposite extreme, so that it becomes appealing though, because people who were experiencing the systematic racism that was perpetrated by those who will be identified as white, that was, a means of building their own selves up. But again, it still goes off into an imbalance. And so the balance is that if you see a form of oppression, it's not that you go to the opposite end of that. The balance is that you come to that middle way where it's going to be acknowledging the good as well as acknowledging the bad of the things that a person may do. And so that's the prophetic way, is that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, what did he say? He said, "Bu'ithtu liyutimmu karima akhlaq." that I've been sent to perfect noble character. And so what some of the ulama they mention about this particular statement of the Prophet ﷺ is that the Prophet ﷺ, he's in his statement, he's actually acknowledging that there actually is good character within the people of Quraysh. So it could have been just a focus that, oh, these are pagans, these are idol worshippers, these are ignorant people and so on and so forth. But no, that wasn't the Prophet's approach. He was actually saying, like, you guys actually do have good qualities about you. I just come here to perfect them, to give you the balanced way of, bringing out the best of your characteristics. And in that way, the Prophet ﷺ was able to do something that no one, especially at that time, had ever thought would ever be possible. He united the entirety of the Arabian Peninsula. Like, that was considered to be kind of like unheard of, unfathomable. That you're going to take all these different tribes and clans and make them all one. Like, no one in their right mind ever thought that that would be possible. But what was the part of the success of Prophet outside of tawfiq min Allah, the success from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Prophet that ability to be balanced. Is that even though, yes, because the Prophet he could have went to an extreme, like he conquered Mecca with basically no opposition. Why? Because he had such an army that the people of Mecca, they knew they couldn't face him. So he could have went to the opposite extreme and just like, I always like to use the example of how even the Prophet ﷺ dealt with the son of Abu Jahl, who was named Ikrimah. Ikrimah was the son of Abu Jahl. And I use this example for multiple different things, but in this case, this also shows the Prophet's balance. Ikrimah, after the Fath of Mecca, after the opening of Mecca, Ikrimah eventually became Muslim. Look at what the Prophet says to the other companions in relation to Ikrimah. He tells the other companions, do not speak ill about his father in front of him. This is Abu Jahl. This is the Fir'aun of this ummah. This is the person who the Prophet actually said was even worse than Fir'aun. He's telling his companions, do not speak ill about his father. Why? Because he understands this is this man's father. He still has a love. He still has a connection to him. It will hurt him if he were to hear people speaking ill about him. So Prophet ﷺ told the companions, do not speak ill about his father. And so again, this is this balance that the Prophet ﷺ had, is that even when we can see certain negative things that have taken place and so on and so forth, we don't allow it to take us to the opposite extreme, because that's not right either. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, is that we're supposed to be a people of justice, even if it be against our own selves. Which always is easier said than done. Could you give some advice on how to find interest-free or Muslim-friendly student loans or banks in the U.S.? So the thing is that for student loans, it's not as simple. Part of it is that there have been some Islamic teachers and others who've given some permissibility in the aspect of a person taking out student loans from the standpoint of a need. Like for example, I've heard one teacher, when asked this question, mention the aspect of that a person should try to find every means to not take out a loan, but that if it comes down to it and there's no other way, that a person could consider taking out a loan. My personal inclination is that I wouldn't try to tell someone to necessarily do that, in particular because, that's, for one, it's not necessarily always beneficial, because taking out a student loan in particular is that oftentimes, even if a person obtains that advanced degree that they're looking for, is that they will stay in a state of debt even with that advanced degree. That, even if it does provide for them, for example, a higher paying salary, sometimes that higher paying salary is not commensurate with the amount of money that you'll spend on that advanced degree. I can be definitely a person that can testify to that. Like, for example, I have a master's degree, and me getting my master's degree personally did not do anything in terms of my salary for the most part. Like, it could have possibly done something for my salary if I was willing to go live in, like, no one's ever heard of Mississippi, or away from all things that of Maryland, or whatever the case may be. Like, I would have to live in like some a strange area of the United States for my master's to really have been financially lucrative, so to speak. And then the thing that I'm going to mention though is that, but there are also other ways of obtaining a master's degree. So for example, I mentioned I have a master's degree, but I put to you like this: between myself and my wife, we have 2 bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and we have no student debt. And part of the way that we've been able to do that, primarily the way that we've been able to do that, is to really take advantage of scholarship opportunities, because that is going to be the best situation, because what that does is that it puts you in a situation that even if you don't necessarily gain any type of like financial increase in regards to it, you're not going to have to worry about the debt that comes along with having a student loan. Now the thing is that, what someone could obviously say is that, well, I don't necessarily have that many scholarship opportunities and so on and so forth. Sometimes it's just a matter of having patience and seeing what door Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens up for you. So for example, from the time that I graduated from college and the time that I entered into a master's program, there's a 12-year gap. Why is that? It's not that I didn't consider or want to necessarily do a master's degree program before that, but I just knew that I did not want to go into a student debt situation. And so I just waited for those 12 years until the opportunity presented itself where I was able to do a master's degree with a full scholarship. So like, for example, I can tell you that, I don't know what program you'll be looking into doing a master's degree in, for example, but like, for example, if you were trying to do it in some of the Islamic sciences, I can tell you that, for example, there are opportunities with like Bayan or other places. If you're looking for linguistics, I would suggest looking at different, in particular for women, and then also women of color. Oftentimes, they'll have different scholarship opportunities, if for nothing else. And yes, this might not necessarily apply as much going forward, but even still, there's still a concept that's there. Is that this aspect of having a more diverse a student body, is that you can find situations where you can get a grant or you can get a scholarship for those type of things, or it could be a situation where you can go in with a program that there might be some type of trade-off. Is that, like, for example, if you're willing to teach overseas, you might be able to find a program where they'll be willing to fund your advanced education if you agree to teach in a certain place in the world once you've completed your education, and so on and so forth. So I would say to exhaust the grants and the scholarships way before, because even if you were to be able to find a Islamic student loan, for example, yeah, I mean, so even if you were to be able to find an Islamic student loan, it's still this concept that eventually you're gonna have to pay that back. And again, not every master's or advanced degree is going to give you that significant bump in salary that would give you the means to be able to easily pay off that debt. I don't know what excuse me. I don't know what the statistic is currently, but I know beforehand, and I'm sure it hasn't changed much, is that they would say that the average person that has a student loan will die with that debt, meaning that they will just never be in a situation where they'll fully pay off that student loan debt. And so, again, my suggestion, you could take it with a grain of salt. This is, as my teacher would say, opinions are like noses. Everyone has them. Is that if you can exhaust grants and scholarships, even if you may have to delay the timing of it, or again, if you may have to, match up with a program, which it seems like you're somewhat already doing, being in Malaysia. But, even if that's the case, that can be better. And then again, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open up a door such that you can, fulfill this without engaging in anything that would be displeasing to him, and that he make it easy for you, inshallah ta'ala. Because I'm really, again, I mentioned that aspect of some teachers saying it because I've heard it from someone that I have a great deal of respect for, even though, if I were to be honest, I wholeheartedly disagree. Like, I don't consider necessarily getting a bachelor's or a master's degree to be an absolute necessity, such that we consider it a haja, per se. Like, there are certain situations where, possibly, I can be convinced of that or whatever case may be. But from my experience, I've seen many different situations where people are able to kind of avoid the riba aspect of it, and still have, fairly good results. So for example, I remember when I was working in New York, I actually sat next to the company lawyer. So we would have conversations sometimes. And I remember how he was telling me how he had gone to get his bachelor's degree, gone to law school, got his JD and all that good stuff, passed the bar, and, so on and so forth, spent all that time, but even more so all that money to get his law degree. And he was telling me how his cousin, who was a master plumber, was still doing better than he was. So, not everyone is going to necessarily be successful going down the quote unquote typical route. Like, I would tell someone in a heartbeat, like, yeah, you probably would be better off just being a master plumber or a master electrician, especially if you're more into working with your hands than you are in terms of books and these type of things. And that can be actually much more lucrative for many people than even, for example, doing something like being a lawyer. And again, I have firsthand knowledge of someone that, basically said that's what happened. His cousin is much better off financially than he is, even though he's the one that has the law degree. But yeah, I mean, if you have, I mean, again, I would hesitate, even like I said, even if you can get an interest-free loan, I would say exhaust these scholarships and grants, because the aspect, having a dain, having a debt, a loan in Islam is not praiseworthy. Like, because even when we say that the Prophet ﷺ, for example, that he had loans and he had debts that he had during his lifetime and so on and so forth, for one, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he's teaching us what is permissible and impermissible in terms of our transactions. Two, he's also teaching us the adab in terms of how we engage when we are involved in these certain transactions. But also three, if you actually look at the way that the Prophet ﷺ went into these debts, is that the Prophet ﷺ, he pretty much always has some form of collateral that he put up for the loan that he was taking. Meaning that if something were to happen, he had given that person, meaning the debtor, had something of his that they could cash in on and get back the money that they were owed from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, which is not our case. Is that generally speaking, especially like with a student loan or whatever case may be, we take on this $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 loan, however much it is, and then we just have to pay back. And again, it's not always that easy. So, I would highly recommend to exhaust the scholarships and grants avenue before going to the loan avenue, because you don't, as much as possible, you don't want to take on a loan, and you don't want to definitely die and have a loan. Yeah. I mean, so if it comes down to it, and like, having a loan is if you're able to find, for example, an Islamic loan, and that's the only, like, you exhausted every other possibility, and this is the route that, so, alhamdulillah, but it does become a greater burden. Because again, loans are taken very seriously in Islam. Debts are taken very seriously. This is why, for example, one of the du'as that's recommended to say before a person goes to sleep is that you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to free you of debts and loans. You ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to free you of the loans and of poverty. أنت أول فليس قبلك شيء وأنت آخر فليس بعدك شيء وظاهر فليس فوق شيء وباطن فليس دونك شيء اقضي عني الدين وأغني من الفقر. That, free me of debt. I say that dua too, thank you. Is that you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enrich you from, to free you of debt and enrich you from poverty. So we should think about that. Is that this is a prophetic dua that was given to us by the Prophet ﷺ, in which he's recommending for us to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to free us of debt. That he's the Prophet ﷺ, like, so that should give us an indication that it's not considered to be a good state to be in a state of debt. And so again, if a person can avoid it, that's even better. Wallahu a'lam. The other thing you can consider doing as well is that if you're doing ESL and you have the capacity to work at a university, that can also be a means of being able to do an advanced degree as well, because many universities they offer that if you work for them, that you can do a degree for free. You know, this is why, and one of the only reasons why I'm considering the possibility of doing a PhD is because I work at a university, and so if I were to do it, it would be free. So may Allah make it easy for you and give you tawfiq. Is there a time period before Fajr that you can pray Qiyam? So Qiyam, actually, there's a difference between Tahajjud and Qiyam, which in full we would probably say Qiyam al-Layl. Qiyam al-Layl, that is just the aspect of, like, if you were to kind of translate it more or less literally, that's the aspect of standing in the night. And so the ulama, what they mention about the concept of qiyam is that they mention that this is a situation where a person just does not go to sleep during the night. You know, so after Isha, they just stay up during the night and do, you know, whatever it is that they're going to do. You know, this is kind of like the aspect of, like they mention of Abu Hanifa, is that he would, for example, have the same wudu at Fajr time that he had at Isha, that he would just stay up the night. So that is qiyam. The aspect of tahajjud is that you actually do go to sleep. You go to sleep after Isha, and then you get up at some point, at some point in time before Fajr. And so, technically speaking, if a person were to go to sleep after praying Isha, and then they woke up an hour later. So, say for example, like we're in the winter months right now. If a person were to go to sleep at 9 o'clock and then wake up at 10 o'clock, and then they go and make wudu and, you know, pray a number of rakats and read Quran and so on and so forth, that would actually be considered to be tahajjud. However, the best way of doing it, the prophetic way that's recommended, is that you get up for tahajjud in the last third of the night. That's considered to be the best time to get up for tahajjud. And the way that you calculate the last third is that you take the time from Maghrib, so whatever time Maghrib comes in, up until the time of Fajr, so whatever time Fajr comes in. And then you take that amount of hours and you divide it by 3. So that last third would be the best time to pray. So for example, let's just say that Fajr is coming in at 6 o'clock. And let's just say that Isha is also coming in at 6 o'clock, just to make it even. So that's 12 hours. So you divide 12 hours by 3, that gives you 4 hours. So from 6 to 10, that's that first third of the night. From 10 to 4, from 6 to 10, that's the first third of the night. From 10 to 2, that's that last third. And then from 2 to 6 is that final third. So basically from 2 a.m. until 6 a.m., that is going to be the last third of the night. And that will be the best time for a person to engage in worship. But again, anything that they would have done after having gone to sleep and then waking up after Isha, that would still count as tahajjud. But again, the last third of the night is considered to be that best time. So essentially that time from 2 a.m. all the way up until right before Fajr comes in. That would be the best time. And then again, Qiyam al-Layl, that is just a person just staying up the night, meaning that they just don't go to sleep. After Isha, they just decide to stay up and engage in whatever act of ibadah that they choose to, whatever act of worship they choose to do. And so that is considered. And of course, nowadays, with just about everything else in our times today, there's an app for that. So many prayer timing apps, they'll also have the Qiyam time on there as well. So, we don't even have to use our math skills to figure out the last third of the night anymore. We can just look on the app. But yeah, the traditional way is that's how you find it. You take the time of Maghrib all the way up to the time of Fajr, how many hours are in between there, and then you divide the night up by 3. And so that last third of it, that is the best time. And so, inshallah, jazakallahu khairan for everyone for joining us. And so, inshallah, we will reconvene in the Gregorian New Year, because Hijri, we've already had the New Year come. But according to the Gregorian calendar, inshallah, our next Living Islam, inshallah, will be in 2025, inshallah. So it'll be January 2025. Typically, it'll be the third Saturday of the month, which will be January 18th. And so unless something else happens, then inshallah, that will be our scheduled timing for that next session, inshallah. So again, jazakallah khair for everyone being with us tonight, and we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will keep you all safe, and anything that was of any benefit was only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all of the mistakes were mine, and I ask that you please forgive me for them, and please keep us in your du'as. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not allow us to leave this abode unless that He is pleased with us, and that He free us of any debts, and that He remove us from being in a state of being fuqara to other than Him. That He keeps us from being in a state where we are impoverished to anyone other than Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, inshallah, we leave you all in Allah's care. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alam wa huwa hasbuna wa ni'mal wakil. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi